Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason.
And I'm Cody.
And we are
Fringe Frequencies.
Fringe Frequencies. Welcome.
Welcome. Jason always decides to speak a little bit louder when we start recording, which is always nice and fun for our sound editor. But that's okay.
That's his job.
We're doing something pretty different tonight.
We are doing something we are doing something very different tonight.
We've decided to do a series, or not a series, sorry, a video or a podcast wherein we react to some content that was created by an individual. This is obviously very popular on YouTube, obviously very popular on podcasts where there are reaction videos and whatnot. And it's something I've been interested in doing for some time because there's such an opportunity to respectfully and lovingly respond to some of the challenges people bring to the gospel and to Christianity. I would say it's becoming less and less fringe, but most certainly I think when you think of YouTube, when you think of media, when you think of the consumption of media, the fringe, on the offset for me, the fringe is talking about really important spiritual things. So things like God, things like hell, heaven, all those things. You know, you don't see much of that on mainstream TV. You don't see much of it with regards to like Reader's Digest, things that people are quote unquote digesting, consuming a lot. But yeah,
it's out of the mainstream, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like I remember growing up in Australia, every now and then, and especially around the early 2000s, we'd get those conspiracy videos or those conspiracy documentaries, like late at night and stuff.
Yeah,
and I used to really enjoy those. But I still think, you know, we look at platforms like YouTube or even Rumble and things like that, and we see, you know, there is this this general sort of creation content stuff, and then this, you know, fringier or not as much. And I genuinely believe in the last 5 to 10 years, 10 years is stretching it, but it's only in the last 5 to 10 years that these religious channels have been getting very popular. You know, so people like, I don't know, Alan Parr with The Beat, or Mike Winger, or the other side, Aaron Ra and Matt Dillahunty, and these people only in the last really 5 to 10 years have gotten big, and yet YouTube's been around for quite some time now. So yeah, I would very much like to you know, to react to this specific creator.
This is one that you've chosen tonight. I'm not quite sure what to expect, but
yeah, look, it's probably
which is interesting, but
I don't think it's what you are expecting to some degree.
Okay.
But I will say that when it comes to the amount of exposure, the amount of people who have actually watched this person, especially in Australia, I think it shocked me how many people watch this individual.
Am I going to be offended?
I hope so.
You hope so?
I do.
You aim to offend me this evening?
It's not hard.
It's not true.
No, but seriously, there's, for me, when I look at this individual, I see someone who is very, like, there's a lot of spite, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of it's almost vindictive, you know. So I've made a lot of assumptions about this individual. He's very open in some of his videos about what he believes and why he creates the content that he does. So we're just going to, I guess, jump into this video. So his channel's been up for about 14 years. The channel is called NonStampCollector. He's an Australian. Well, I'm fairly certain he's Australian. It's pretty obvious, not only from his accent, but also from the nature of his videos. It's got a very uniquely Aussie humour. But that said, I don't know if he's actually Australian, and he's clearly, I don't know if he's agnostic, atheist, what he identifies as. I haven't watched all of his videos, but this particular video is his first video. It came out 14 years ago. I think it's called A Conversation with Yahweh, and basically, we'll watch it. Jason hasn't seen it. I've seen it a few times, and in my opinion, it's the foundation of his channel. It outlays his views. It outlays the attitude he has towards God and towards the gospel, towards the Bible, and he uses that throughout his channel to these positions to create content that, you know, people obviously like to consume, but I think only a very specific type of person. So let's jump in.
Yeah, let's get into it.
If you're ready.
I'm ready.
And I'll let you start.
I am ready.
Start getting into it. All right.
I'll probably be the one to pause first to discuss.
So we are going to go with a pausing format. So as we watch it, Jace or I might pause it and just discuss what we're seeing. But yeah, it's a very straightforward video, very interesting format with his stick figure paint style, you know, aesthetic. But yeah, you ready?
It's ready. Yeah, let's go. Let's do this.
Hello? Hello?
What? What? Who's that?
This is God, the one true God.
God? Really? Wow, there's so much I want to ask you. Wow, you have all the answers to the scientific and philosophical questions that we've always wondered about.
Yes, and I come here with good news. I love you so much that I'm going to save you.
Save me?
Yes, I take your burden. Your price has been paid.
What price? Save me from what?
I've saved you from eternal separation from me after you die. From hell.
Separation? What? Hell? What is that?
Hell, a place of eternal fire, a place of nothing but pain and punishment forever. But fear not, my beloved child, as you needn't be sent there.
Sent into a lake of fire forever? By who?
Well, by me.
By you? What for?
Well, for your rebellion against me.
Rebellion against you? Hold on. Exactly which God are you?
I'm Yahweh, or Jehovah.
Well, Yahweh, nice to meet you. Now, why do you want to punish me for eternity?
Well, I made the rules for everyone and set them out very clearly. You rebelled against my rules.
Oh, did I? Where are the rules? What are they?
Haven't you read my book?
Book?
Yes, I wrote a book, the greatest book the world has ever known. The greatest message of love and the perfect guide to morality. I dictated it to a desert tribe in the Middle East about between 2,000 and 5,000 years ago. You haven't read it?
No, what did it say?
Well, you know, be kind to each other, treat people the way you want to be treated. Plus, there are a few hundred other pages of really violent stuff about killing that doesn't really matter anymore.
Right, but when people decided to not treat others nicely, you decided you would throw them into a lake of fire for all of eternity as punishment?
No, the way it started, you see, there was this tree, right, which I told them not to eat off. But they did, so everyone goes to hell.
Who's they?
The first man and woman, your ancestors.
Right, so they ate off the tree and you decided that you should punish them in a lake of eternal fire forever.
Well, yes.
So where do I come into this?
Well, the good news is that since the time when all that happened, I've saved you from the punishment for what they did.
I'm getting punished for what someone else did? That's hardly fair. You call that just?
Yes, I'm perfectly just. It's absolutely fair and just that you be burned forever for their crime. You are a direct descendant. But now, let's get back to the point. Since I don't want you to go to hell...
You don't?
No, of course not. I don't want anyone to go to hell.
Well, why are you going to send us all there?
Because I have to. Those are the rules of the universe. Now, will you just let me finish?
Sorry.
Since I don't want you or anyone else to go to hell, I made myself into a man a few thousand years ago in the Middle East and had myself killed.
I don't get it.
Well, it was a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice. I paid your price.
Paid? To who?
Well, to me.
To you?
Yes.
So you sacrificed yourself to yourself so that you wouldn't have to send me to hell for my ancestors having eaten from a tree you told them not to eat from.
Yes, well, that and everything else that people have done. It's just I told them that I didn't want them to eat from that tree, and I gave them free will so that they had the option to not obey me if they didn't want to, and they disobeyed me. They ate from the tree, so they, and every single human being who ever lives, has to be sent to hell after they die to burn forever.
Sent to hell by you?
Yes, of course by me. Who else has the power to take someone's soul and have it punished and tortured for eternity? But I made it so you don't have to go to hell anymore. Isn't that great? See how much I love you?
Because of this human sacrifice in the Middle East?
Yes, I purchased your forgiveness.
You purchased it from yourself?
Yep, purchased it with my own blood.
Well, why not just forgive?
What?
Well, why not just forgive?
What do you mean?
Well, you're God, you're all-powerful, you don't want to send people to hell, so just don't.
Yeah, I'm afraid it doesn't quite work that way.
Well, why not? No one's going to argue with you if you don't send them to hell, so just change your mind if you want to, and then you don't have to send anyone to hell, do you?
I'm God. I don't just change my mind. I'm always the same. I never change. I'm eternal.
Never?
Well, on some things maybe, like, say, almost all of my book. But this is about my laws that I haven't changed my mind about. In the beginning, I gave people free will and the freedom to disobey me if they choose. But if they choose to disobey me, then I send them to hell.
Well, why give them free will?
I wanted them to do my will voluntarily because they loved me and because I was threatening them with eternal torture if they didn't. But they didn't. And I've had to go to a lot of trouble for you
Let's
all.
pause it there for a second. Let's pause that. So, I'm not surprised by this at all. Not at all. I'm going to come right out and say it. In 2011, not to that extent, and it wasn't unbelieving, my son, Elijah, who's now 17 this year, I think this was 2011, so he was about 3.5. So I'll go back about 4 years prior to that in a minute. So I know where he's coming from, except that I don't know this individual. I don't know from a bar of soap. Either he's had these questions and pastors have been stumped and they haven't answered them, like, no disrespect to some of the pastors over the last 15 years, but they didn't answer them for me either. I had to go and figure that out for myself. And again, no disrespect to the pastors. They have their own little bricks in the wall. I love that saying from Voddy Bockham. Every pastor's got his brick in the wall. He's got his place that God has placed him, and he can't possibly know everything. And that some pastors will pass through your life, and they'll plant a little seed, and that's what I found. My son comes to me, he says, Dad, he's 3.5 years old, why did Jesus have to die? Why did Jesus have to die? What's the stock standard answer? What is it?
Why did Jesus have to die?
Yeah.
The stock standard answer is, I guess, for your sin, for you.
Yeah, to save us from the bondage of sin.
Yeah, to save us from sin. Yep.
Okay. Why?
Well, because sin is it has to be paid for.
Why?
Well, because in a universe where there is an all-powerful, all-just God, he can't allow sin to go unpunished.
Okay. Go back to what he's saying, which is sure. Let's take that stand that he can't allow it to be going unpunished, but he's right, and this is the thing. He's bang on right, but he's understanding it wrong. My opinion. God gave man free will, and this is where the whole Calvinists are gonna absolutely fry me here. So just on that little topic there, my position on Calvinism, Arminianism, the Bible teaches free will. It also teaches God's completely in control and sovereign. So I cannot reconcile the two, and neither can a Calvinist and neither can an Arminian. So we'll just leave that there for a second. He's dead right that God allowed that to happen in Eden. He allowed it. He had to have. Mm-hmm. You cannot escape that. I'll go back 4 years from Elijah for 1 second. It was 2009 and 2008, 2009, and I discussed the origins of sin. I said, I was really, really grappling with this because that's what he's getting into as well, the origins of sin. If God is not the origin of sin, because sin and evil is not, and I think R.C. Sproul did a really good series on this in the late 80s, early 90s. Evil's nothing. It's not a thing. Sin is not an actual thing. It's a deviation from a standard, entropy. But God didn't do it, but he allowed this deviation from a standard. He has allowed it. So the question begs then, if sin is nothing, then it doesn't have an origin like a creation. It's not a created thing. It's an allowed deviation. This is getting very philosophical, but it's getting back to what he was saying in the beginning. God definitely allowed sin to come in the world. Now, Elijah asked me this question. God allowed it. So I'm not going to get into the whole origin aspect of it, but Elijah asked me this question. Why did Jesus die? Oh, save us from the bondage of sin. Why did he have to die on the cross? Why couldn't he have just, made things this way? And why did he allow Adam and Eve to do what they did? It sounds a bit vindictive, and then he sent himself to die on the cross. And my conclusion for this is that the beauty of the gospel and the beauty of God's own sacrifice for us starts before the beginning of time. It starts with the decision of this powerful entity that we have absolutely no grasp on, not we understand God in this human sense. He decides one day, he decides to create earth. He decides to create angelic beings. He decides to create some pantheon of the gods, i.e. Elohim. He decides to create these angelic beings and obviously us and angels. And even before that, before he creates it, the very nature, this is how I've understood it, okay, and people can disagree with me, the very nature of God and in the very nature of his attributes of love. When people say love is a supreme ethic, what is wrapped up in love? Love is the whole complete circle. What is in it? Patience, kindness, justice, wrath, loving kindness, etc., etc. It goes on. That is love. All of those things are wrapped up in love, including wrath, right? If someone does something to your child and you sit back and go, yeah, don't worry about it, that's unloving. Now, if you decide that you want to do something to another human being who's hurt your child, obviously I don't necessarily condone it because we have a judicial system that it obviously acts in place of God in that respect. But is it loving or unloving that you want to seek retribution for someone harming your child? It is loving. And wrapped up in God's attributes is wrath. Now, my understanding for this and how I come to the conclusion that God is just is that we, and this is going to be very controversial for some people, if not God allowing free will, let's call it free will, Calvin is slaughtering me right now, if not God allowing free will and for Adam and Eve to make that decision the way they did, I do not believe that we would understand God and all his attributes in the same way. Now that's controversial because people say, well, did God make a mistake? No, I don't think he made a mistake. But here's the thing. How much more beautiful is it for an entity that's completely beyond our wildest understanding, who doesn't need us, who isn't in need of anything? He decides to create and love and have fellowship, but by the very nature of his own attributes and for us to understand him, doesn't want us to be robots. And so he allows this act of free will against him, knowing full well in advance, because he had to know, that it would turn against him. And now that he knows it would turn against him, and he creates a solution so that we could come back to him. That, for me, even before we get to the cross, is the most profound thing that I understood, and it was the key to unlocking this. And I know people are going to rip me to shreds. They're going to pull out their Bible and say, show me that. Okay, prove me wrong. There we go.
Yeah. Look, I think when it comes to my position, and that was, bro, it's not untrue what you're saying, right? But when it comes to my position with regards to what this guy is presenting, right, what he's presenting, it for me, there's two things. Number one, this is not real. Like when we think about someone trying to understand God and someone being in the presence of God, trying to understand his attributes, his nature, his motives, this is a completely false caricature of what is reality, so not only do we not have any kind of example, anything close to this in scripture, but the attributes of God, the nature of God is completely mischaracterized in this video. But
can you understand how he comes to that conclusion? Though?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So when I am set with these very reductive conclusions, such as, or very simplistic problems, such as, well, okay, you have allowed sin, why? And, now you've paid for sin to yourself, why? I think, number one, there's a lot of he's disingenuous. Like, he's not being as clear about the severity of the situation, the complexity of the situation as he can be. And obviously, as you said, people were not able to answer the question, why have humans been able to commit sins and why do they then have to pay for them? So the explanation you gave is given in another way. I'll give another analogy. It's Frank Turek's. It's one of my favorites, right? So first, it's the idea of free will, all right? So we actually have a Lady Jamie tonight, which is awesome. Hello. And so, Lady Jamie, when it comes to... Well, look, let's just say hypothetically, answer as the generic hypothetical girl in case you don't want to be implicated personally. Have you ever had the affection of an individual that you didn't want? Someone who was interested in dating you or interested in being around you, and you didn't feel the same way? So...
You don't have to answer that question. It's because you're my daughter. I don't
Oh yeah, sorry. By the way, Lady Jamie tonight is another offspawn or offspring of this man. So
I think if you ask the average girl, that would be a definite yes.
answer is the average girl, right? And let's say this individual actually loved you, but you didn't love them, right? They loved you. And I'll tell you now, let's say that their love was genuine, but you simply didn't love them, right? Would it be right for that person to force you to love them?
No.
Could it be called love if they forced you to love them, even though they actually love you, but your decision was not to love them? Could it be called love if they just flicked a switch in your brain to make you love them?
Love and coercion.
Yeah, they're antithetical. Yeah.
So what you're arguing was that it's not so much that's built into the design, that is a natural consequence of God creating.
So the idea is that this guy is saying, well, you know, that is NonStampCollector, the creator of the video, is saying, why didn't you just make it so that I would love you anyway? Why didn't you just make it so I couldn't choose not to love you? You know, and this is where the problem
That's not
comes
love.
in. Exactly. That's not love then. You know, Frank Chirrut calls them wet robots. All we are is wet robots if that's what God made, you know.
Yeah.
So you like, and this is what I was trying to show is love is only possible with free will. It's only possible with free will, you know. So when God made the decision to give us free will, that in and of itself was an act of love. You know, the fact that we decided to sin against him, the fact that, and this is an interesting thing, you know, he has this individual who created this, he has a very elementary understanding of sin and how it implicates man. So there's a lot of this, you know, because Adam sinned, I have to pay because Adam sinned. So firstly, Adam was the best example of mankind. He was the best example of man and the representative of man, right? So I think the implication might be, well, if it was me in the garden, I wouldn't have sinned. I wouldn't have eaten that fruit. And the reality is, yes, you would have. You would have eaten that fruit because Adam was a perfect, innocent example of you and he still ate the fruit, right? The second thing is that's completely ignoring the idea that you have your own sins to answer for. Like, does this person really believe that, you know, were it not for Adam's sin that implicates me, were it not for that, I would have been fine. My standing before God would have been perfect were it not for Adam letting me down. Like, how ridiculous is that? I mean,
Can we touch on two things though?
Yeah.
Just the first thing is, you know, I don't like that word pity, but I do feel for this guy in one sense, and I'll tell you where I feel for him, and it is in the dire lack of discussion within congregations outside of the normal orthodox of our canon, of our, you know, Reformed or Baptist or Presbyterian or Pentecostal. We don't like to engage as much, in my experience, conversations or you know, questions about God, especially that pastors are uncomfortable with because they don't know, and they should know. They should know. I mean, this stuff, in my opinion, pastors should know, and I should know, and you should know, to actually be able to contend with this in a way. And you know, read our Bibles obviously is important because this is more common than we realize. It's so more common, and I don't think. And this is the thing. This actually didn't shock me. I thought this was going to shock me, but it didn't shock me at all because you're right. He is coming from a place of ignorance, but I don't know that he's coming from a place of, how do I put this? An intentional ignorance. Like, how do I put this? A place where,
like, willingly ignorant.
Willingly ignorant. I don't think so. I think I have a sense that if you can contend, because to be honest, most Christians wouldn't be able to answer. They wouldn't be able to answer his contentions.
So this is something I want to just quickly address, bro. So you mentioned some pastors can't answer this question.
No, it cannot.
And I agree, right? But that gives, like, what a sorry state that Christianity is in when these, which are frankly, Jace, these basic childlike questions are asked. These are very basic. And I don't want to sound like I'm condescending to this individual, because I'm not. I love this individual. What I'm trying to say is that these are the first questions people should be asking. All right. What is the nature of this God? Why has he created the universe ordered in this way? How can we reconcile this with the idea of the gospel? How does Jesus Christ play into this? Why is sin sin? Why is it sin? What makes it sin? What makes it that? Why can't God sin? Can God sin? And why not? These are the questions that people who are genuinely seeking the truth should be asking. And it's a sad fact that they get to these questions and they stop. And they stop partly, in my opinion, because yes, the church has let them down. There's no pastor around that can answer them. There's no one who can give them a straight answer to what are, frankly, difficult but first questions that you ask. When it comes to the second aspect of it, I think people stop because they don't want the answers. And this is something that Jason was saying before, that maybe the type of person who finds these videos, this content, doesn't want the answers.
It plays into things it plays into their preconceived notions already, and it's fed on. So yeah, look, I guess in conclusion, before we just start this back up again, it sounds to me, at least on the surface here, that we have an individual who, for all intents and purposes, has at some stage been churched, grown up in church. I don't know this individual at all. There's either been a pause in reading scripture or even meeting the right people to even be able to ask the right questions, to then be able to get a better understanding of who God is, and maybe that space wasn't there to ask those questions. That's a potential. But at the end of the day, if there's a hunger for truth, I guess so that we can't say this for everybody. See, when I look at my Muslim friends and Hindu friends and atheist friends, and when I say atheist friends, I have some people that I know that I would consider, friends, work, colleagues, whatever. And I would say in each and every one of us, there is a hunger for ultimate truth, but we go about it differently. So I respect the fact that there is some yearning for an ultimate truth, and yet the waters are muddied by this idea that your truth can be okay and someone else's truth can be okay. No, there can only be one truth.
Some people don't love the truth, bro. Some people don't love the truth. Some people love their own truth. So there's a difference there you have to make. That's
kind of what I meant to say.
In fact, most men hate the truth. Most men hate it because the truth is light, and it brings light to their darkness. And there's a lot of issues about this in John chapter 3,
I probably didn't, in fairness, we're doing this live. I probably didn't phrase it as accurately as I could have, even though I had really good intentions.
I know what you mean. Like no one
I know how to articulate this, okay? There are individuals out there that in their own conscience, they know that what they're saying and what they're doing is wrong, and yet they're trying to convince everybody else around them. And only they know they're doing that. They're trying to convince everybody else around them and be belligerent about it and carry on that path. There are others, and I put Muslims in this category. I put well-meaning Hindus, practicing Hindus.
Look, it's not a basis of a religion.
No, it's not a basis of religion. Individual. But it is the individual. But I would, okay, sure. Let's not take it to religion. We could take it to let's say new agey type stuff as well. You could take it across all different sectors. And I would say this is that well-intentioned, and at this place in my life, I feel like this is the right place for a bunch of different reasons. But when confronted with cracks in their paradigm, cracks in it, it's completely ignored.
Yeah. So this is the difference between someone who loves the truth and someone who doesn't love the truth. In my opinion, when you start cracking their paradigm, when you start cracking into their worldview, and they become upset and they don't want to let go of it, and they don't want to consider the alternatives, and they become very dogmatic. I mean, that for me is someone who can't say that they love the truth. They just love their truth. And And look, there's a couple of things. I mean, I really wanted to get into some of the critiques of the video and the logical fallacies that are being put forward. But I'm also enjoying, discussing the broader implications of this person's position. So just quickly, I found something very interesting at the start of the video. This individual who comes across God, he says something along the lines of, "Oh God, fantastic! I wanted to ask you so many questions. I wanted to, everything about science and philosophy. I wanted to quiz you." And I want to be clear: this is obviously satire. This is obviously satirical. But the individual is clearly drawing from some personal position. So it's not as simple as him being able to say, "Oh, look, it's just a joke." Obviously there's a point to his content, and the contradiction here was really interesting when he said, "Hang on a minute, which God are you?" It's like to go from accepting this God as, "Oh God, you know everything." He understood the attributes of this God to okay, which God are you? There was, for me, that in and of itself was a self-contradicting example. The person knows who God is because we all know who God is. We all know who God is. If there was a being, and obviously it wouldn't happen this way because this is, again, just a bit of a silly caricature, but if there was a being that revealed themselves to us and it was clear that they were God, they wouldn't have to say that they're God. If you look at some of the examples in Scripture that we have of encounters with God, there's really only one where and I'm talking, I guess, of Moses, where he's not exact, like where God reveals himself and he's like, "Who are you?" Even when you talk about the road to Damascus with Paul, he knew straight away that he was speaking to the Lord.
Gideon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And this is the thing, well, I'm drawing on things like when God is talking from Mount Sinai to the Jews and they're saying, "Can you stop talking or we're going to die?" I'm thinking of Ezekiel when he sees the likeness of the glory of God and it makes him faint twice and he has to be brought back to consciousness because of the splendor and the majesty of God's nature.
He wasn't sitting there being casual or asking
No,
God
it
a
was
bunch
like,
of stuff.
"Hey, bro,
He knew.
how
He
you
knew.
doing?" It's like, no, when you're in the presence of the Almighty God, the biblical God, because, He's kind of created his own God. He's created his own version of the biblical God and presented it as the biblical God. And frankly, it's disingenuous to do that. If you want to be caricaturing an aspect of Scripture, let's say the description of God's nature, you have to use the description of God's nature. You can't just make up your own description of God's nature and then caricature or criticize that. You have to actually use the Bible's version of God. So, look,
there was a really small segment in there. It was a very, very mini segment where he talked to God, and he goes along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Oh, you killed a whole bunch of people in the Old Testament." And he didn't say the Old Testament. That was he referring to. And I believe, and maybe I'm mistaken because you've seen this video before, but he's referring to God telling the Israelites to basically slaughter the nations around them. So I want to unpack that very briefly because that'll actually fall into other discussions when we start getting back into Nephilim and pre-flood and after the flood. One of the contentions and a bone of contentions with God about the Israelites is, hey, he was so genocidal and killed the nations around them. For those out there who haven't read their Bible, Christians, for those out there who are not Christians, who do not understand Scripture, and even within church, the whole Nephilim, Enoch, that stuff is not. It's not that it's not popular, but it's part of the story. And the mere fact is that before the flood, God destroyed the world because the intentions and the heart of man and the thoughts and intentions of man were continually evil, not their actions. And continually. Now you imagine a week where you go through and every single thought is evil. Like the actions are going to spring from that. God destroyed the world. It was completely corrupt. It was corrupted its flesh. It was corrupted its spirit. It was corrupted in its mind. Now when we go post-flood and we see that creeping back in and the idea, not the idea, that how do I put this? We believe that came through Noah's sons' daughters. Right, that's one hypothesis, that we have this corrupt seed still coming in. God allowed that. There we go. God allowed it. He allowed it for whatever purposes we don't know, but he allowed it to fester. And we come through we go through to Shem, Shem, line of Shem, to Cain, and we go to Gilgamesh or Nimrod. Okay, there is a parallel there, and we have
I'm not sure
Babel.
if it was Ham or I think it was Ham. That was Cain.
Sorry, the line of Ham,
Yeah.
and
Ham, Shem, and Japheth were
yeah,
the three sons.
that's right, and where that stupid hypothesis that the some real strange, they weren't Christians, but they were religious zealots in the 1700s. They said, the line of Ham was black. Have you heard that?
Yeah,
Have you heard that one? It's so stupid.
Man, I've heard the mark of Cain is black.
That's where that the justification for slavery and everything else is so evil. Anyway. So so this whole idea, well, it's not an idea. So from that we have these nations, Amalekites. We have the Canaanites, and we have the description of them as giants. We have the description of them as very large people, a giant warlike people, many times larger than the Israelites. Now there are some archaeological studies that suggest that the Israelites are no more than 5'5". They were very, very small people. Again, this is archaeological. It's obviously ex-biblical. It's archaeological. And they were very, very small. And you think about this. God set apart this tiny nation, right, to basically to show the world through the Hebrews, through Israel, who he was. And the rest of these nations around them, they weren't like Australia, New Zealand rivalry, like between the rugby. Hey, guys, we're talking about nations that were completely lawless. Now, sure, they had their own bro code, at some sort of funny level, but they were burning their children alive on altars. They were sacrificing them. Sodomy and rape and essentially lawlessness completely abounded. It was by the sword. Everything was by the sword. It was dog eat dog. It was completely lawless societies. They had their own processes, and they were absolutely reprehensible. It wasn't like today. Well, it was kind of like today in some ways. We have abortion and we have all these other things as well.
I think morally today we're very similar because the heart of man is still the same.
It's still the same.
But there's something that's very important to point out here. We have the rule of law after Moses. So that is to say, we have a legal system that is underpinned by God's word. And for those of you who don't know this, it's and obviously I don't believe the watchers or the listeners of this content would be familiar with this. Common law was built on the Bible. So what we experience as common law, as our rights, our inalienable rights with regards to individual dignity, individual liberty, free speech, these property ownership, the rights to safety, the right to not be harassed or molested, all of these things come from the Bible. This actually comes from the Bible. So imagine a world without those things. Imagine a world where, think of like, what's that place? They had the riots because I think the police killed a black man in some thing, and they had the riots.
Talking about George Floyd?
I think it was George Floyd. I can't remember who it was. It might have even been Rodney King. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But there was this period of time where, yes, obviously people were very angry and very upset, but there were these nights where people were crazy. They would rob any shop. They would break into anyone's business. They would break into homes. They would burn things down. This is lawlessness. That's lawlessness. Imagine if it was like that all the time, and the only thing that stood in their way was if they were stronger than you.
Like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Well, that's exactly right.
Running through the streets, just going, "Hey, look, let's be rapey."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine if there were no police, no fire brigade, no ambulance.
Oh man, the intentions of the men. If there was no rule of law, and I've said this many times at home, if we did not have a rule of law, the same thoughts, the same evil thoughts reside in men and women today. They are only held back by the rule of law. If it wasn't there, Sodom and Gomorrah would already be here now.
So to reiterate that, we are looking at this world from a perspective of people who have the rule of law, But imagine this pre-flood world, this world that is described in the Old Testament, where everyone is evil and some guys are running around and they're like 15 foot tall, So when I consider the idea that I am kept safe, and I am kept safe by police, I'm kept safe by courts, I'm kept safe by lawyers to some degree. Don't give them too much credit. But but the idea that if all of that was taken away, I can actually imagine a world where the only thing that you would have is your own ability to protect yourself and your family. I mean, what a terrifying world when we know in our modern world where we have all of those things, what happens when those systems of protection break down.
Which is why we had clans. You had clans and tribes because they're protecting each other.
So the reason I'm going through all this, the reason you're going through all this is because I don't have a lack of imagination to understand how desperately wicked man was, how desperately wicked man is. You know, the only thing that's preventing us now is the Holy Spirit, the Comforter that's come, and the rule of law. That's the only thing that's preventing the depth of sin that could be apparent and was apparent in the past. So when it comes to NonStampCollector saying something along the lines of, oh, you were so wicked, you know, you killed all these people, aren't you so violent? You don't have to look very far, not only in Scripture, but in the world to see that it's man's heart that's violent. We're the ones that are killing. We're the ones that have done all this. We are not, how do I say this? We don't have the authority or the right to make decisions that God can make. And when God makes those decisions, he doesn't owe us an explanation. He really doesn't. And yet he gives us one. You know, this is something that I find most perplexing about our God. He actually considers us and considers our state, considers who we are, and considers our safety for eternity, you know. So without getting too far into the other specific things.
Yeah, because it's that particular topic there, which is sort of just really briefly finishing off, God's instructions for the Israelites not to mingle with the nations around them. Why? Because they were idolatrous, they were evil, they were wicked, they were doing absolutely detestable things, and the Israelites ended up falling into there.
Yeah.
They ended up falling into child sacrifice, they ended up moving into temple orgies, and they ended up doing that anyway. These nations around them were also, in our understanding, they were also affected by a corrupt DNA. They were, and we will talk about that at some other session. And so, because of that, they were no longer human. They were hybrids. They were destined to be destroyed. That's a topic for another day. And some Christians will go, "Oh, where do you get that from in Scripture?" Read it.
It's very clear.
Read it.
Read it. The other thing I'll say is that there are things in the Scriptures that indicate that God also allows things, you know. So I think of Ruth, right? Ruth is a good example of a Moabitess, a woman who is able to include her line, her blood into the Messiah's line. So Ruth ended up being, I think, Jesse's grandmother or Jesse's mother? Jesse's grandmother, I think, which is the direct line to David, you know. So here we have a Moabite, which, if you understand the origins of the Moabites, mate, Lot and his daughters, it was crazy. And so I'm pretty sure they were the origins of the Moabites.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
Edomites was Esau,
and
which are basically cousins.
No, her sister, the other one. So they created the Moabites, and I don't think it was. I can't remember. Either way,
we don't have the Bible open right now, so forgive us.
No, and I will say this, you know, there is implication that those conditions before the flood, that is to say, in Noah's time, that those conditions are going to return. You know, so there's an implication that line, that blood, that DNA has not actually completely gone, and that's why we're talking about it coming through Ham and coming through the flood time. But this is the thing.
We kept it off, we kept it off. But we sort of covered a few of those little points because I think some people would have picked those things up and then gone, "Hey, you didn't talk about that," or he mentioned that. So let's. And
there's things we're going to miss. Honestly, there's things we're going to miss. So we'll go on. We'll continue going through the video. We are at 5 minutes and 30 seconds. We'll continue from here. And pause it whenever you want, bro. Sure. But there's already a lot.
I even got myself nailed to a crucifix.
To satisfy your own appetite for punishment and death.
Look, I'm trying very hard to save your soul from eternal torture here. I'm offering to forgive you for being born despicable and not being perfect. If you accept it...
Accept it?
Yes. The thing is, I did this human sacrifice in the Middle East, and the way it takes effect for your eternal soul is that you have to hear about it and believe it. Now, if you don't start believing everything I've been telling you today as absolute fact, then after you die, I'm going to judge you as having not lived up to my ideal, which is perfection, and I'm going to burn you for eternity, okay?
So you're saying I have to believe...
All right, we're going to start pausing it more. So I've paused it at 6:11. Sorry. Okay, so again, there's this idea that that God requiring man to live up to his ideal is not reasonable. Okay, and let me tell you something. It's not reasonable. We actually can't live up to his ideal, and it's not an ideal. It's living up to his ability to fellowship and be in communion with us. So saying, oh well, I can't live up to your ideal is different to saying, well, I can't live up to the standard I need to be in fellowship with you. You know, so I don't know about you, but like, I do have a certain standard that I have to be able to be in fellowship with people, not necessarily to talk to them and be in the room with them, but to say, you're my brother, come sit at my table, eat with me. I mean, I'm not too keen on pedophiles sitting at that table. I'm not too keen on mass murderers sitting at that table with me, enjoying a meal with me, although I am no better than them. You know, the gap between me and a murderer is very, very small when it comes to the gap between me and God, right? So all of us are in that same condemnation. All of us are in that same... See, you know, the implication that God needs us to live up to his ideals to satisfy his selfish purpose is ridiculous. You know, we all feel that way. You know, and God desires to have fellowship with us, who, us being very, frankly, pathetic beings, that like very pathetic, and then giving us a way to do that, and then giving us a solution so that we can be in fellowship with him, we can be at his standard. And then, you know, to consider someone would complain about that is a good example of why some choose not to be with him. You know, this is the thing, and I was going to get into this a bit later. There's this talk. This guy obviously has a problem with hell. You know, NonStampCollector obviously has a problem with hell and eternal damnation. And I think there's a big misconception about hell. You know, hell is a place that is in God's absence. Heaven is a place in God's presence, right? So
in his fullness.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to and I'm not trying to downplay hell. Hell is a terrible, terrible place because it's out of the presence of God. You know, I think the implication this guy's giving is that, well, you know, obviously I wouldn't choose to be in hell. Well, hell is saying I don't want to be with God, and this person obviously doesn't want to be with God either. So God's not going to force you into his presence. God's not going to force you into his being. You know, he's going to give you the opportunity and say, look, this, if you want to be around me, which is light, love, truth, honesty, justice, if you want to be around those things, you can be around me. But if you don't want to be, that's fine. You can have death, isolation, cold. You can have all of those things, you know.
And I'd also like to contend with the idea just briefly before we press play again. For us, can I ask you a question, Cody?
Yes.
Do you love God because otherwise you'll go to hell?
No. This is so stupid.
But you know where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I'm very aware of us doing this reaction video and people perhaps getting this idea of us sitting on a pedestal. Far out, man. Like we're so, and we're not even trying to be humble for the sake of humbleness. We are so far short ourselves. Like we have some great weeks, and then we struggle another week. Then we make a few stuff ups there. Have to roll off a bunch of apologies to a whole bunch of people, and you learn from stuff. You know, we don't aspire to holiness. We don't aspire to God's standard, because otherwise we'll go to hell. and I'm going to say this really clearly. Anyone who out there right now who is going to church or meeting with a group on a Sunday or you know, hanging out with Christian people, or they're running around with this image, this kind of, you know, image of as if they're a Christian holiness, because they'll go to hell. Man, you got to
going to hell.
Well, you've got to ask yourself, you know, are you saved? That's a question for you as an individual. Like, that's why I'm not a big fan of. I'm a fan of the truth, but these kind of hell preachers, hell and fire. I'm not a fan of two things. I'm not a fan of the hellfire preachers. I'm also not a fan of universalism. You know, it's you know.
Yeah, universalism, the idea that we're all going to heaven no matter what, I'd reject as well because God rejects it. But the idea that so the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is not bad. The fear of God is a good schoolmaster, and it should always be in your heart. This fear that, man, the Lord is watching me. God is watching me. I'm open to Him. Like, He can see my heart. He can see my thoughts. He knows me intimately. That fear should never go away. But it's not the motivation for us to serve and love Him. My motivation to serve and love God is very clearly presented in the Bible. Because He loved me first. God loved me first and sent His only Son to die for me so that I could be forgiven. So this is another thing that I find. I think he'll get into. He's already touched on a bit the transactional nature. The idea that my sister's big on this as well. It's like, why did Jesus have to die for me? Like, that makes no sense to me. And this is not something that you can really perfectly make an analogy for. The best one I've come to is the fine one. The whole idea of a debt and a fine. We pay for fines. We actually pay for fines here in Australia. I can run a red light and I can get a bill, and the bill says $350. You ran the red light. I can actually ask Jason to pay it for me, and that's perfectly legal. He can actually pay the $350 to Fines Victoria, and I will actually be forgiven of that sin, of that breaking of the law. And sin, just so you all know, sin is a breaking of the law, right? So the analogy of a fine, I think, is one that doesn't fully show it, but it gives people something to start with.
That would have shown, and not to break you down live, but that would have shown that not only am I the one paying your fine, but I'm also the one giving it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other analogies I like is God is the judge who's sitting at the table. I don't know what you call it, and they have what do they call the hammer, the gavel,
the guillotine.
The hammer, not the.
Oh, the gavel. Yeah, the gavel.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So God's sitting there.
Sorry.
And He says, you've committed sin. You've sinned against me. The punishment is that you get the lash. What are you going to do? And the person says, well, I don't want the lash. Is there anything else we can do? And the judge takes off his white hair thing, takes off his robe, puts the gavel down, and goes and takes the lash. And that's an example of our God. And if anyone wants to attack that person and attack that entity and say, oh, how silly is that? How silly is that? Like, mate, wait until you're in the courtroom of God and He's judging you, and you say, I don't want you to do it for me. I don't want you to take the punishment.
That would be like, let's say someone's sitting before a judge, and the judge gets the gavel and lays down the judgment, and the individual goes, no, this is terrible. Like, I don't want to go through this punishment. And the judge takes his wig off. He says, no, I'll take the punishment for you. And then the individual goes, you're taking the punishment for me? Why don't you just get rid of the rules anyway? Why don't you just get rid of the rules? Why don't you just not have those rules in the first place? Hey, bro, then you wouldn't be judging me, and I wouldn't have a problem. We get along. That would be ridiculous.
So that's another issue.
Yeah.
So there's this implication. Well, and I've seen this from the Muslim guys we've spoken with. God is so powerful, perfect, and He can just forgive a sin if He wants. Well, no, God can't do that because God is a perfect judge. Perfect judges don't allow sin to go unpunished. They simply don't. You'll find that in our judicial system. If you have a judge who arbitrarily decides when they want to apply certain punishments for the same crimes, that judge doesn't last long. That judge is disbarred and sent to prison, or at the very least, they're never allowed to practice in law or anything ever again. But what judges actually do is they try and interpret the law in such a way that brings justice to crime. So judges aren't there to make decisions on what the punishment is. Judges are there to correctly apply the judgments according to the law, right? And this is what God does.
Guilty or innocent, basically. Yeah.
Well, the jury decides whether or not they're guilty or innocent. And we know God's law. God's law is very clear. If you just want to break it right down, it's 10 commandments. It's just 10 laws. That's all it is. And the 10 commandments should reveal to you very quickly that you've broken them. but should reveal to you very quickly. God is subject to the rules of righteousness and justice. He is subject to those. That is to say, and by choice. He's subject to them by choice because he's a all-loving, all-powerful, all-just God. So all of these things can't interplay with each other and have God say, okay, no, I'm just going to forgive that sin because I'm God and I can do that. That is what man would do. That's what man does, And the more we make God like us, the less he is God, so much more less.
We have our own little gods.
Yeah, exactly. And
our own little
ways.
shrines. Yeah.
So I'll hit play again. Sorry, bro, but there's so much in this to break down.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But I'll just hit play again. We've only got a few minutes left. Playing.
Leave all this stuff, and then I'm saved.
Yes, that's it. All you have to do is believe this stuff and devote the rest of your life to me.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that
Oh, what now?
Did you see that? All you have to do is believe this stuff and then devote the rest of your life to me. Clearly, Catholic implications here. Our God doesn't believe in works-based salvation. So all you have to do is believe that is true with regards to salvation.
Really, really quickly, we're going to crack that open so that people understand what we mean about works and salvation. Okay. I'm going to make this really, really simple. Salvation is by grace alone. God's grace, right? God's grace through Jesus Christ. So salvation is getting through the pearly gates, and it's unmerited. Getting through the pearly gates is the unmerited, okay? However, our works will be judged.
Yes.
And in the sense of, in heaven, God is not unjust. So for every single individual who followed God, chose to live that life, and that's that relationship between God choosing and us choosing. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but for this unmerited favor, where we are in God's presence through the pearly gates, salvation. Do we really think that God is that unjust that for every individual they're apportioned riches and rewards in heaven all the same? No, that would be unjust. So that is what we mean when we're distinguishing between works and salvation. We believe firmly, and the Bible teaches this, that we will be rewarded according to our works, rewarded in damnation and rewarded in salvation. But salvation and works are two different things.
Yeah.
They are two different things in the sense of we are going to heaven and we have salvation.
Stop banging the table.
I love banging the table. I just want to bang it. Salvation is unmerited. It is not by works. However, our rewards in heaven will be according to our works, and our rewards in damnation will be attributed on the basis of our works. We don't believe babies are in hell, by the way. We don't believe babies go there. I think that's pretty obvious from Scripture.
What happened to this being short and simple, bro?
Anyway, yeah, short and simple. I don't know how to do short and simple. So anyway.
These are all can of worm topics.
Lots of can of worms.
All of them. Everything that's being brought up here is, and it's a shame because all of this is so easily refuted just by a little bit of study of Scripture and theology. The implication in this video is that the average person would feel this way. No, the unlearned person would feel this way. The person who wants this answer would stop here.
And it's not so much about refutation, because for those that are listening to us right now, and look, I would say we're amateur theologians. I've known the Lord for a long time. I'm 42 and known God since I was 6 years old. And some people say, "How did you know that?" Well, I've got a story some other time. But we're not so much coming from this from a refutation to jump on someone. I actually feel for this guy in the sense that, either he hasn't wanted to contend with the truth, or he's had an experience within, for example, no offense to Roman Catholics, but in, let's say, Roman Catholicism, or a very fundamentalist church, or even a, extreme Pentecostal church where it's just gone, hey, look, man, this is crazy, or this is just ridiculous, or this is just judgment, and he's just thrown it all out, and that attitude has been displayed this way. So I feel for this guy. So I just want those people out there to know that, if you've struggled with these issues and you really didn't, if you're honest with yourself, that you felt the same way, just be honest with yourself, be intellectually honest with yourself that perhaps you didn't go further to really dig in to answer the questions that you had, and excuse me for this, but lazily just went, hey, you know what, stuff you, God, fist in the air.
Yeah.
You know, because it's easy to do. And I think at some stage we've all been, for a lack of a better way of saying it, angry at God. You know, I certainly have. You probably have.
Oh man, we're geared towards it. Our
Yeah.
hearts are geared towards being angry at God.
Even for those of us that knew God, we're blaming him for this and that, and then we've obviously turned that around. So look, please play again, it's fine. Yeah.
So from 620.
Yeah.
Well, I can't exactly just start believing something by choice, right? I can't just decide to believe that I'm Napoleon just because I want to believe that I'm Napoleon. If I could, I'd be in a mental hospital.
Yes, of course not.
So that, let me just quickly say, that is an obvious straw man. So a lot of what the non-stamp collector character, the man character, is doing is he's straw manning the whole time. So he's basically saying, oh well, then I think the interview with Jordan Peterson and that BBC girl is a good example. It's like the non-stamp collector man's like saying, okay, so I can't do that because what you're saying is I can do this. It's not true. No, God isn't saying that. You know. That you have to believe that you're Napoleon. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that you have to believe in the truth and that you have to believe the truth of him, right? Which is a far cry from believing you're someone you know you're not, right? So I'll just say that huge straw man, you know. And yeah, anyway. And I love the idea that this man character talking to this God character is like stumping God with his questions. It's like, you know, what God is this?
God is, he's sort of portrayed as a bit dumb.
Yeah.
Intelligently designed you with very strong reasoning abilities.
Yeah, so how come in order to have my eternal soul saved from your sentence of never-ending torture, you require me to believe something that appears absolutely ridiculous? That in itself is completely contrary to human nature as you designed it. You can't just choose to believe something.
Yes, I realise most people can't, and those people are in big trouble.
Okay, I just have to point this out. So yeah, you can choose to believe something. You can actually choose to believe something. That it's silly for him to say you can't just choose to believe something. Well, how does that fly in 2023? Just to choose.
You can choose to believe any ridiculous idea.
You can choose to believe the Earth is flat. You know. But in all seriousness,
we said no inside jokes.
In all seriousness, there is. I refute that. Yes, some people do just believe things, and yes, you can. We are are given reason and we are given logic, and that's what we have to rely on to come to the conclusion that God is, and that even that Christ is. You know. So I'll keep playing. I'll try not to stop.
I know. But I also invented this thing called faith, which is the ability to convince yourself to believe things on little or absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And it's not insanity, okay? Faith is different to insanity. If you believe something ridiculous on faith, it's actually very respectable.
Faith? Hasn't an unquestioning adherence to outrageous, untested claims been behind every whacker who's ever gone on a killing spree?
Look, reason, evidence, unbiased inquiry, they're all good, but they're not going to save you from hell. So I don't recommend you concern yourself with them too much.
Alright, let's go on. What happens after I die if I somehow...
God aside on this one. Let's take God out of the picture on this discussion here. This idea that insanity, like, if you're insane, you believe you're insane, therefore you have faith you're insane. Someone who is insane someone who is insane doesn't know they're insane. But they still believe their ideas.
Yeah.
And they still have faith in their ideas, but everybody else knows they're insane. So there's that. And there's also this idea, and that's going to what he started with, was that to have that we as believers in Yahweh and God, that we don't believe that you need to have evidence that God exists. Yeah. Of course we do. Of course we do. Every single scientist from Newton to Newton. I mean, gosh, the list goes on. Albert Einstein, you name it. And there are many neuroscientists today, microbiologists.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys. Yes, they were Christians, but they didn't. the basis for God, it was self-evident through their studies of science. It was just mind-blowing.
It's a false dichotomy. It's a complete false dichotomy. Faith and evidence are antithesis, like they're opposites. You know, it's ridiculous. You know, if you're going to attack faith, and especially a biblical faith, again, you can't define. And this is straight.
I agree
from,
that faith without evidence is silly. I actually agree with that. Yeah.
Red Pen Logic did this wonderful video. I love that guy. You know, he's obviously loves the Lord, which I love.
Who's Red Pen Logic?
Oh, we'll talk about him another time. I plug him. He's awesome, right? But basically, and I'm going to steal his content here. But basically, you know, he did this short video on faith versus evidence, and he said, you know, these people, they want to define faith for themselves, but if you're going to attack a position or a proposition, you have to let that proposition define faith for itself. So faith is defined in the Bible as something that has good evidence to support it. So faith in the Bible is described as something that is a belief in something that is expected, or something that you can trust is going to happen. You know, so the idea that faith and like he says, oh, I just have to blindly believe that, you know, in this thing that is ridiculous. And then, no, that's not how Christianity works. And I think the Creator knows that. I think he actually knows that. What I would say is that blind faith is more exampled in someone watching this video and taking what he has had to say on the basis of him saying it. You know, like anyone who watches a video like this and walks away and goes, yeah, he was right, and I'm not going to look into the other side of it, they have a blind faith, you know. And
I mean, to be, not to knock atheists tonight, but like to be an atheist is not a non-belief. There's no such thing as a non-belief. It is the belief that there is no God, and there is a faith in that.
Yeah,
there is a faith. There is an undying. And we don't have to talk about the evidence aspect of it, but it's like, and I don't even use that hypothesis. Well, you know, I've got more chance of being true because I've got more of a 50-50, whereas you're discounting the idea of God at all, so you're actually putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Oh, Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
I'm not even going to invoke that.
Yeah. It's more so, and look, we're not here to present the evidence for Christ. We're not here to present the evidence for God. We're here simply just to look at this person's position and say, well, that's not how faith is defined in Scripture. That's not what God's real expectation is. There's this idea that, oh, well, you know, in order to believe in God, I have to completely switch my brain off. No, in order to believe in God, you have to switch your brain on. You have to actually look into this and come to the general reasonable conclusion that, oh, there must be a God, you know, which I think most people who are reasonable will come to, you know. And it's also discounting, you know, the geniuses who in our time and way before our time who came to the obvious conclusion that there is a God, people who laid the foundation.
Some who didn't even have faith.
Yeah.
Many.
Absolutely. Scientists who laid the foundation of faith in their hearts by just observing the world as it is, you know, and then it was undeniable to them, intelligent, very intelligent men and women that were able to identify, oh, I'm silly now, microbiologists, engineers, you know, artists who were like, no, there must be a God, you know. Anyway, 7 minutes 37 in. Let's go to the end, bro.
Let's go to the end.
All right, let's go on. What happens after I die if I somehow choose to believe this stuff on no evidence in order to escape your eternal, never-ending punishment?
Well, I'm glad you asked at last. This is where it gets exciting. If you accept my forgiveness for being born appalling, then you get to live forever, worshipping and thanking me day and night and singing my praises eternally.
Forever?
Yes, for every minute of eternity, my people will be praising, worshipping, giving thanks, adoring me. You're going to worship and thank me never-endingly, firstly for having made you, and secondly for having the grace to punish myself rather than you for your crime of not being perfect.
Yeah,
see how much I love you? But first you have to believe, okay? But don't wait too long. You have to decide and commit yourself now in the absence of evidence before you can really see if any of this is actually true in an objective sense. Basically, I put you on Earth to see how effectively you can shut down the reasoning abilities I gave you and believe something that appears absolutely made up. Fail the test and you'll burn. Pass the test and I'll allow you to worship and thank me forever.
Wow, that's really generous of
At this point, anyone viewing this section right here, if you're being intellectually honest, you can see that at this point here, it's vindictive. It's vindictive. It is coming from a place of either hurt or wanting to get back at either an individual from a church experience or a Catholic school experience or an individual that's hurt them who happened to be religious. For a start, a new heaven and a new earth. A new heaven and a new earth. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cody, but from my understanding of the New Testament Revelation, this is going to be made brand new. It's going to be a new heaven and a new earth.
Bro, I'd settle for the old one. But no, yes, it is. And not only
it's
that,
not going to be, people think about heaven, so people think about heaven as this big cloud. It's going to be Eden with God's throne being connected again as it was in the beginning with Eden. There's no distance and cut between it anymore. It's not going to be us sitting around on a cloud playing a harp. I can't think of a more boring place to be, and I don't think God is boring. It doesn't even describe that we're going to be sitting there going like this the whole time. Our worship is going to come from the fact that we are now made perfect. That in itself is the worship to God.
Any attack on heaven and the experience of heaven is obviously someone's lack of imagination, or their lack of understanding of the nature of God. So we look at a fallen world, and if you use a biblical narrative, we can see a fallen world all around us. And yet in this fallen world, we see examples of such beauty and pleasure and wonder.
Even the way it is.
Even in this, this is I don't know, like a painting that got dropped into a vat of acid, and it's still amazing, So when it comes to someone trying to say, oh, what for every minute and every second of every day I'm going to be worshiping God, they clearly have a misunderstanding of the nature of heaven and the nature of God, and a misunderstanding of the nature of time in heaven.
And also how they're going to understand and see God, compared to let's say C.S. Lewis's seeing through a glass
darkly.
That
we Paul.
Yeah, we have this poor vision. So
no, Paul, as in Paul said that, and C.S. Lewis. Anyway, long story.
I get Paul and C.S. Lewis mixed up all the time.
But yeah, we've got 10 seconds. We'll finish it off.
Yeah.
For you to give us that choice.
Yes, I know. It's more than you deserve. It's grace. I do it because I'm the essence of perfect love. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks. You really cleared things up for me. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so that for me, the ending of that video presents the reality of this person's situation, the irony of him joking that the man at the end of that is saying, oh, you've really cleared it up for me, but he actually hasn't. It's unclear what God wanted. It's unclear why God does what he does. It's unclear what grace and mercy is. It's unclear what sin is. That's what the video is showing, that this guy's saying, oh, thanks for clearing that up for me. And the joke is God hasn't really cleared it up for him. Well, I feel like that might be the same situation for the creator of this thing, NonStampCollector. It obviously hasn't been cleared up for you. You obviously don't understand the situation with regards to what the Bible teaches and what the nature of man and God even is,
And more to the point, for the creator of this video, we don't know you. We're not judging you. We're obviously critiquing your video.
Yeah.
Clearly. You have to risk offending people in conversation, and even for the sake of the truth, I guess the question I have for the listeners of his video, and even just for the listeners of us sitting here discussing this today, is, are you interested in objective truth? And objective truth can be one, can't be many, can be one. And then if you are interested in objective truth, and that truth can only be one, are you interested in the idea and the source of that objective truth, which we believe to be God, which we believe to come through the knowledge of Jesus Christ?
And it would be a dream for us if you were to hear what we have to say about this, and even more so, a huge reach for you to even respond in any way. But I'll say this: I have reached out to you on YouTube, and you have responded to my comments. So thank you. And I must say, you have a very dedicated fan base. Although that's not hard when there are so many out there who have been offended and upset by this poor representation of what Christ actually is, what God actually is. Men will have a lot to answer for the representation they've given of God. And so I say this to you, Mr. Non-Stamp I want to talk about a lot of your videos, especially your Bible contradiction videos, because I think you take a hard and fast approach to explaining them, and I think they will catch people off guard. But when broken down and looked into and taken seriously for the content that they are, the serious content that they are, I think they do come apart. They come apart very easily. So this actually went a lot longer than I expected. So I do apologize.
Longer. I think we went an hour and a half.
Yeah, look, we'll wrap it up
That's
here.
fine. Yeah,
we'll wrap up the episode. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Fringe Frequency.
Yeah, thanks for listening to us once again. We like to bring interesting content. It's going to get. We're going to ramp it up a little bit. Look, I might just give a bit of a teaser for next week, if that's all right.
No, let's not
commit
to anything.
No more teasers? No. Okay, no. We'll just introduce it as they come. So we got a couple of really cool guests coming on in the next few weeks, which is going to be really exciting. Every now and again, we did actually have something else planned tonight, but that's fine. Every now and again, we will actually do some reaction videos, and we'll just run a bit of back and forth, a bit of swing in the bat, and it won't always be necessarily strictly religious things per se. It could be topics on archaeology, history, some really strange out there topics. It is Fringe, so we will dive back into some really off the topic bits and pieces, but we try to keep it fringe, and I think a lot of the topics we are talking about are not mainstream. They are fringy. They may be common to certain circles, but particularly objective truth is becoming fringe, which is really what we were discussing tonight, which is objective truth is fringe. So cool. Cuddy, thanks. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time, and we shall see you
again soon.
Next week.